Hi, and I'm very excited for today's video where we are going to see how to find good moves. So basically you will combine the principles I've explained in the previous videos, namely center, development, flexibility and prevention. So if we think about moves that occupy the center and develop pieces, E4 is the first one that comes to mind, because what does it do? It occupies the center here and it liberates immediately these two light squared pieces. The disadvantage, you might say, is that black can immediately attack it, forcing us to reply. So you may say that, well, d4 is perhaps a better move, since white can't really immediately attack it, while since the pawn is defended by the queen. On the other hand, only this light square bishop and a couple of squares for the queen are liberated. So if we think about a move which does development and is very flexible, there is the move knight f3 or the move knight c3. Knight f3, for example, develops the knight and doesn't commit any pawns yet, which means you can basically change your change your moves depending on what black does. So in this category of flexible moves is the move c4, which occupies the center. Also keeps everything very flexible. For example, since we haven't moved this knight yet, maybe we can play something like this, and this knight will go to e2. That's just one idea. Another idea is that this knight can come out behind the pawn. And white is just white has a number of plans, but one of the main pluses, one of the main good things about this move, except that it controls the center, is also that it's extremely flexible. So let's say e4 and black plays e5. We have a number of moves. Knight f3 is probably one of the strongest, if not the strongest. Why? It develops the knight and immediately jumps to the center and immediately attacks the pawn on e5, forcing black to react. Also, one advantage as well is that the bishop can come out quickly, which means we can castle in just a couple of moves. First, I'm going to show you the Ruy Lopez to really illustrate that point. Developing and taking the center. Black does the same in a symmetrical fashion. We attack, we jump with the knight to the center also, and we attack, we force black to make a move. Black defends it with knight c6, so he develops and defends at the same time. And in the Ruy Lopez, white plays a bishop b5, developing the bishop, immediately getting ready to castle or making sure that opportunity is available. And there's the tactical threat, perhaps not right now, but in a few moves, of bishop takes c6 and knight takes e5, winning the pawn. So black usually plays a6 here, making use of a tactical trick. White can take, but he can't comfortably win the pawn because of either queen to d4 or queen to e7. So black attacks both the knight and the bishop, and after this white just has got a worse position. So let's go back a few moves, and let's say after bishop b5, let's say black plays d6. So there are a couple of interesting moves. d4 is certainly one to consider. Knight c3 is also a move which prevents, so knight c3 is interesting because it is prophylaxis, prevention against knight to f6. On the other hand, it does block this pawn, which means that if you play knight c3, then you basically give up, at least for a couple of moves, on the plan of going c3 to d4. Although here it's totally possible to immediately go for d4, challenging the center, freeing this bishop, and maybe at some point also threatening d5, making use of this pin here. Black at the moment can still prevent it by playing bishop d7, or I think also a6. Let me see, a6. Yeah, a6 already loses, since in this case black can't take back with the pawn since this happens. And I'd like to rewind here a bit. So how did this happen? How did white go from a normal looking position to getting such a huge advantage? Well, by playing challenging moves. Black played a bit too passive, I think. So in here on d4 made a mistake going a6 and forgetting about the tactic, or not calculating correctly this capture on c6. But why was it possible? Because we developed actively. We put our pieces in the center, so you see this piece is on b5 and very actively pinning. Also fighting against this knight from controlling the center. This knight is in the center, this knight and this pawn is teaming up to pressure this pawn, and here black makes a mistake, and after takes and takes, this pawn is attacked twice, and black can't comfortably take back with the e-pawn, since after queen takes e8 and king takes e8 and knight takes e5, this is immediately attacked, this is also attacked. This structure, these pawns on the queen side are horrible. So black already has to waste a move with king e8 defending f7, or he will lose the rook. And now I think you could take, but the engine says it's actually better to just keep developing. In any case, we played very principled, and that's why by combining development, combining central control, more active pieces, and black, well, made the mistake of a6. That's why we were able to get this very good position. So here, after e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6. Also, definitely an interesting move is to go knight c3 here. And how do we get to this move? We develop, and at the same time we it's prevention against knight to f6. So black will probably wants to attack our pawn on e4, and by playing knight c3 here we just prevent it. Black might go knight f6 anyway, so here we have the 4 knights game. Actually very consistent with our play of development and putting pressure on the center would be to put this bishop on either c4 or b5. Bishop b5 is an interesting hybrid of yes, the Ruy Lopez and 4 knights. And here we are ready to castle. Let me show one more example with d4. What we're trying to do. If possible, get a big center with e4. That's why often black will play knight to f6 or d5. Both moves control this square e4 here. There are a couple of ways to play this, but one of the recently more modern ways, I think, or it's a bit more popular now, is to play knight c3 and to prepare this e4 push. Black plays now d5 to prevent this, so it's prevention against our move. And here, if we're talking about flexibility and move orders, it's very useful to bring the bishop out now, since we want to continue with e3 and develop our king side. So it will be useful to have our bishop developed outside of the pawn chain, so that after we play e3, we can develop these pieces, and this bishop will be on a more active position on this diagonal. So finally, let's see what you can do, for example, when black is turtling. So that means putting his pawns mostly on the third rank. So e4, let's say d6, d4, e6. So here you have a number of options. If your opponent is playing such passive moves, what do you want to do? You want to castle as quickly as possible. So that means moving this knight or this bishop. You will see that the more flexible move is to actually leave this bishop here and determine when for where to put it later. Because let's say you play bishop c4, then maybe I can be hit with a tempo with d5, or maybe black will play something like a6 b5, hit it with tempo. If it goes to b5, well, black will probably just defend with c6 or put the bishop in between. That's also possible. Probably d3 is the best square for it, but by playing knight f3, you will note that, well, maybe you're thinking, well, can't I put a knight on e2? Well, yes, but first of all, that would block the bishop and slow down your development. And second, with knight f3, this knight is more active in the center supporting these squares. That also means that it supports, for example, a future push e4, e5. So let's say black continues his passive play with bishop e7. What did we just say about this bishop? Probably the best place is bishop d3. So let's put it there and get ready to castle. And bishop d3 also is a very nice move, since now we defend this e4 pawn, which means after knight to f6, we don't have to worry about black taking it, and we can continue on with our own plans. So knight f6. And now there are a number of moves. c4, for example, is definitely interesting, making room for the knight to come out behind that pawn. But the most flexible and also if we're talking about king safety, the best move here is probably castles. Brings the h1 rook into the game, gets the king safe, and you can still decide how to develop all of these pieces here on the queen side. So let's say castles and castles. So if you look closely, our bishop is lined up here against the h7 pawn, which might be useful for us later. Also, we have this center supported by the knight and the bishop, which means right now we can actually push e5. I'm not sure if it's the very best move, but it's I think a very good move, very principled. We remove this defender here of h7 by playing e5, and after d takes e5, d takes e5, the knight has to move. Let's say it goes to the d5 square. So now it's getting a little trickier to find the best move. Many players really play c4, which I suppose it's fine, although that does allow the knight to come here to b4 and harass our bishop. And our bishop is beautifully placed here, so we don't want to lose it. So that's why you could even consider playing something like a3 or c3, preventing it. What's also a really nice move, I think. Well, this pawn is really annoying for black. Maybe he wants to attack it with f6 at a certain moment. Also consider that when we took d takes e5, that opened the d file. So if you imagine these two pieces were gone and there was a rook here, that would be a pin. So how do we combine those two ideas? Well, we can play queen e2. So f6 isn't really stopped, but let's say if black would play knight d7, blocking this bishop from the defense of e6, for example, then e5 would have been, f6 would have been more difficult. Sorry, it would be more difficult since we could take it, and after black would have to take with the rook, or else we could play queen takes e6, and after rook takes we can play bishop g5 with tempo, and you can see everything flows very nicely here. So our idea here is twofold: to indirectly put more pressure on e6 in case black plays f6, and also to bring the rook here to the d file. So let's say black here plays knight to c6. Now we can play rook d1, but I think there's even a better move to first play c4 here, since now we remove this blockader on the d file. So after knight to b6 and rook to d1, we are already threatening bishop takes on h7 check to pick up the queen. So let's say black plays queen to e8. Now you can see that we can make the breakaway again, putting the queen on e4 and threatening mate on h7. So after g6, this position looks terrible for black, but at first sight it looks like he can still defend it. So there's one game here which goes bishop g5, which might be an okay move, but I wouldn't really recommend it, since usually you don't want to create straights when you have such a big space advantage and a good attacking position. And here you might be tempted to win material with bishop to h6, but black actually has a very sneaky move f5, and if you take en passant, then white takes with his bishop, counter-attacking b2, which means after bishop to f8, bishop to b2, our rook here is hanging. So in case black takes in case we move this, black can take here on a1, and even though it's still better for black, we did lose a lot of our advantage. So let's go back, and if you know that after that sequence the threat, the counter-attack is here, well, then how can you prevent it and at the same time develop a piece? You can play knight c3, blocking this diagonal, and at the same time bringing in more attackers, or like Saran says, bring more pieces to the party. So let's say black has enough of it and he wants to create some counterplay, get rid of our pawn on e5. So we happily take, and after bishop takes f6, Now our knight is blocking this diagonal, which means we can go bishop h6. Let's say rook takes e7. And here many moves are good for white. I like the move queen to e3, making room for this knight to come to e4. And let's say knight b4, but after knight to e5, bringing in more pieces, more or less forcing some trades, but trades which are good for white. Why is that? Black will have to trade their only active pieces. So these two pieces, maybe this one, but I'm not so sure. These pieces aren't doing anything. So after the trade of these pieces, let's say here, what remains on the board are these very active pieces for white. Black still has not really put these pieces in useful positions, and this is just a hugely advantageous position for white. So let's go back and let's see how we got here. So black played passive, and I know that that can be sometimes challenging to play against. What moves do you use? But I hope that I showed that by thinking about the principles development, flexibility, center, prevention, those ideas will really help you to come up with good moves. And in this case, you can see that our white's play almost seemed effortless. See, threatening, chasing the knight, threatening to win the queen here, threatening checkmate. So here it seems like black has a solid position, but here we saw that bishop h6 didn't work because of this counterattack. So we made a dual purpose move of knight c3 to block it and bring in the knight. And after f6, this is just a slaughter. Sorry, I lost my line here somewhere. Well, this is just a slaughter for black. And so here in the final position, black actually does manage to trade some pieces, but he is really only trading off his only active pieces, which means the position that remains is still superior for white. So hopefully this helped you. If you liked the video, please like, subscribe or leave a comment, and else I will see you perhaps in one of the next videos.